The piano exploded with sound before anyone screamed. Bang, bang, bang. 4-year-old Lily Kang slammed both fists into the keys of the grand piano like she was trying to break it open. Like there was something trapped inside the wood, and the only way to free it was to hit it until it cracked. Rain hammered the tall windows of Hanul House, Ethan Kang's estate on the hills above Seoul, and every crash of the piano matched a crack of thunder outside, as if the storm and the child were speaking to each other in a language no adult in that house could translate. A housekeeper stepped forward, hands raised, voice gentle. "Lily, it's late. Let's." Lily shrieked. Not a word, not even close to a word. A raw, animal sound that made the housekeeper flinch back against the wall. Ethan Kang stood in the hallway, still in a suit from a board meeting 11 hours ago, watching his daughter through the open doorway. He didn't move. He didn't speak. He gripped the doorframe so hard his knuckles went white, and for a man who controlled a company worth billions of dollars, who could end careers with a single sentence, he had never in his life felt more powerless than he did standing in that hallway, watching his own child destroy a piano because she couldn't destroy the thing that was actually breaking her. "Sir," the housekeeper whispered, backing toward him. "Should I call Dr. Huang again?" Ethan didn't answer. He was staring at his daughter's small hands, red now from hitting the keys, and thinking about the last time he'd heard her voice. 8 months. 8 months since Lily Kang had said a single word to anyone. 8 months since Clara died. The housekeeper finally reached him in the hallway, breathless. "Sir, she won't stop. Should I call someone?" "We've called everyone," Ethan said quietly. It wasn't an answer. It was a confession. Lily's fist slowed, then stopped. She sat there in the sudden silence, chest heaving, staring down at the keys like she didn't recognize her own hands. Then, without a sound, she slid off the bench, walked to the corner of the room, and curled herself into the smallest shape a small body could make. She didn't cry. She didn't look at anyone. She simply disappeared into herself, the way she had every night for 8 months, and Ethan stood in the doorway not knowing whether to go to her, or whether his presence would only make it worse, because more than once in the last 8 months, it had. He chose to stay in the doorway. It was, he would later admit to himself, the wrong choice, made 100 times in 100 different ways since the accident. 8 months earlier, that same piano had sounded like laughter. Clara Kang sat with Lily on the bench, her hands guiding her daughter's small fingers across the keys, slow, patient, smiling the whole time. "Like this," Clara said, humming a melody that didn't belong to any composer Lily would ever learn about in school. It was older than sheet music. It lived in Clara's chest before it ever touched a piano. "Again, Mommy," Lily said, giggling, pressing the wrong key on purpose just to hear her mother laugh. Clara kissed the top of her head. "Again," she agreed, and began to sing. Her voice was soft, unpolished, the kind of voice that wasn't trained for a stage, but was trained for exactly one small girl, in exactly this room, on exactly this piano. That night, after Lily was asleep, Clara kissed Ethan on the cheek and told him she had a meeting to get to before her flight the next morning. He barely looked up from his laptop. "Drive safe," he said. Ordinary words. The kind of words you say 1,000 times without ever imagining they might be the last ones. The car never made it past the bridge. Broken glass. Emergency lights sweeping red and blue across wet asphalt. Ethan's voice, raw, screaming a name into rain that didn't care. He remembered running. He remembered a police officer's hand on his chest, holding him back from the wreckage. He remembered later, in a hospital corridor that smelled like antiseptic and fear, a doctor saying words he still couldn't fully hear even now, 8 months later, when he tried to replay that night in his head. He remembered driving home alone at 4 in the morning and standing outside Lily's door for 20 minutes, unable to make himself go in and say the words that would turn his daughter's whole world upside down. When he finally did go in, Lily was already awake, sitting up in bed like she'd been waiting. "Where's Mommy?" she'd asked. Ethan had knelt beside her bed and tried to find words that didn't exist for what he had to say. He never fully found them. Lily listened to him stumble through an explanation no 4-year-old should ever have to hear, and when he finished, she didn't cry either. She simply nodded, small and solemn, and didn't speak again for 8 months. Sometimes Ethan wondered if some part of her, in that moment, had made a decision that if speaking meant this was real, then not speaking might mean it wasn't. If you've ever lost someone and felt like the whole world just kept moving without asking your permission, stay with this one till the end, because it's about to get a lot harder before it gets better. And if stories like this hit you somewhere real, hit subscribe now, so you don't miss where this one goes. 9 months of specialists came and went through Hanul House like a parade Ethan hadn't asked to host. Psychologists, speech pathologists, trauma counselors, behavioral therapists from 3 different countries, private caregivers who lasted 2 weeks, sometimes 2 days, before quietly requesting reassignment. Lily hadn't spoken to a single one of them. Dr. Daniel Huang, the most respected child psychologist in Seoul, sat across from Ethan in his office, folder closed on the desk between them, which was never a good sign. "She's trapped inside the moment she lost her mother," Dr. Huang said. "Every method I know is designed to pull a child forward, out of trauma, into the present. Lily won't be pulled." "Then how do I get her out?" Ethan asked. His voice came out sharper than he meant it to. He was tired of hearing what wasn't working. He needed to hear what would. Dr. Huang studied him for a long moment. "You may have to stop trying to pull her out, Mr. Kang. You may have to go in." Ethan didn't understand that sentence. He wouldn't understand it for weeks. Nia Brooks landed in Seoul carrying 1 suitcase and a small leather bag of instruments she'd collected over 8 years of music therapy work in Atlanta, a hand drum, a set of chimes, and sheet music she never actually used because the songs that worked weren't written down anywhere. They lived in her the same way they'd lived in her grandmother and her grandmother's mother before that. Nia had become a therapist the year she turned 22, 3 years after her younger brother Marcus died. She didn't talk about how. She talked about what came after. The months she couldn't speak either, until a friend put headphones on her and played an old gospel record, and something in her chest finally cracked open enough to let the grief move instead of freeze. Music hadn't fixed her. It had simply given her grief somewhere to go. She'd spent every year since trying to give other people that same door. Ethan met her in the foyer of Hanul House, still expecting to be unimpressed. He'd met a dozen specialists who arrived with confidence and left with excuses. "We've already tried everything," he told her, not unkindly, just tired. Nia looked at him. Really looked, the way people who aren't intimidated by money tend to look at people who have a lot of it, and said, "Then perhaps the problem isn't that you've tried too little." She glanced toward the closed door of the piano room. "Perhaps you've been asking her the wrong question." Ethan didn't like that answer, but something about the way she said it made him let her through the door anyway. Lily was already hiding when Nia stepped into the piano room, folded into the small gap behind the curtain, knees to her chest, watching the stranger the way a wild animal watches a hunter it doesn't trust yet. Nia didn't move toward her. She didn't call her name, didn't kneel down with a forced smile, didn't do any of the things the last 11 adults had done in this exact room. She simply sat down on the floor, cross-legged, several feet from the piano, and began to hum. It wasn't a famous song. It wasn't anything Lily should have recognized. Just an old, wandering lullaby, low and warm, the kind of melody that sounds like it's been sung in kitchens and porches for 100 years before anyone wrote it down. The curtain stopped moving. Nia kept humming, eyes closed now, not performing for anyone, just letting the melody exist in the room the way rain exists outside a window, present, gentle, asking nothing. Slowly, the curtain shifted. 2 small eyes appeared in the gap. Nia didn't open her eyes. Didn't look. Didn't chase. Lily stepped out from behind the curtain. For the first time in 8 months, a stranger had entered Lily's world instead of trying to drag Lily into theirs, and Lily, for the first time in 8 months, had let her. Every day after that, Nia came back. And every day something small changed. On day 3, Lily sat 2 feet closer than the day before. On day 6, she let Nia's hand rest near hers on the piano bench without pulling away. On day 9, she touched 1 key, gently this time, not a fist, just 1 finger, and looked up at Nia like she was asking permission to feel something. On day 12, she hummed. Just 3 notes. Off key, uncertain, barely audible. But it was the first sound Lily Kang had made on purpose, toward another person, in 8 months. On day 15, she cried. Really cried, the kind of crying that comes from somewhere so deep it shakes the whole small body, and Nia didn't try to stop it or soothe it away. She just stayed close, humming low under the sound of Lily's grief, letting her know it was safe to feel this without being rescued from it. Ethan watched most of these moments from the hallway, the same hallway where he used to stand and watch his daughter break a piano. Now he stood there and watched her come back to life, 1 inch at a time, and he didn't understand how, and it terrified him a little, how much he needed to understand it. He finally asked her directly, "What did you do?"
Nia thought about it. "Nothing," she said.
That's not an answer. It's the honest one. She looked at him. She didn't need someone to fix her, Mr. Kang. She needed someone who wasn't afraid of her pain. Everyone who walked through that door before me came in trying to make her okay again, as fast as possible. Children can feel that. They can feel when you're more comfortable with your own fear of their grief than you are with the grief itself. Ethan didn't answer right away. He was thinking about every specialist he'd hired, every hour he'd spent buying solutions instead of sitting on a floor. He was thinking about how he'd handled his own grief exactly the same way, outrun it with work, bury it under board meetings, mistake staying busy for staying strong. "Join us tomorrow," Nia said. "Just sit. Don't fix anything." "I don't know how to do that." "I know," Nia said. "That's why I'm asking." He almost didn't go. He stood outside the piano room the next evening for 11 full minutes, his hand on the doorknob, more afraid of that room than he'd ever been of a hostile boardroom or a collapsing stock price. Then he opened the door. Nia was already humming. Lily was on the bench beside her, small fingers resting on the keys. Ethan sat down on the floor, the way Nia had shown him, several feet away, saying nothing. Lily looked at him. For 8 months, his daughter had looked through him, past him, around him, never quite landing on his face. This time, she looked directly at him, and something in her small features shifted, like she was deciding something. She slid off the bench. She walked to him. She reached up with both hands. Ethan took them like they were the only solid thing left in a collapsing world, and Lily climbed into his lap and pressed her face into his chest, and Ethan Kang, who had not cried at his wife's funeral because he'd told himself somebody in that house had to stay strong, finally broke, silently, his shoulders shaking, one hand cradling the back of his daughter's head while Nia kept humming like nothing in the room needed to stop. It was the first time father and daughter had truly touched each other since the accident. But there was something in that room only the audience knew, something neither Ethan nor Nia understood yet. The melody healing this family didn't belong to either of them originally. It belonged to Clara. And nobody in that house had any idea why a stranger from Atlanta was singing a dead woman's song. The night everything cracked open started quietly. Ethan couldn't sleep. He walked past the piano room around midnight and heard humming, Nia, alone, packing up her bag for the night, humming that same lullaby to herself without realizing anyone could hear. He froze in the hallway. He knew that melody. He'd heard it 100 times late at night, through a cracked door, Clara singing it to Lily before bed. He'd never once asked where it came from. It was just background music to a life he thought he'd have forever. He pushed the door open. "Where did you learn that?" Nia looked up, startled by the intensity in his voice. "My grandmother taught it to me, when I was a kid, back in Atlanta." "Why?" Ethan's face had gone pale. "My wife used to sing that. To Lily. Every night." The room went very quiet. "That's not possible," Nia said slowly. "That song isn't published anywhere. It's not on any record. My grandmother learned it from her mother, and as far as I know, nobody outside our family sings it." "I've heard it 100 times, Ethan said. "I would know it anywhere." Neither of them said what they were both thinking, but it hung in the room between them, heavier than either of them wanted to admit. Ethan spent the rest of that night in Clara's old study, going through boxes he hadn't opened since the funeral. He found what he was looking for near the bottom of a drawer, a small digital recorder, the kind Clara used to keep voice memos before flights. He pressed play. Clara's voice filled the room, warm and familiar in a way that made his chest ache. She was singing the same lullaby, Then her voice, unguarded, talking to no one but the recorder. I hope Lily remembers the song even if she forgets everything else. I hope she remembers where it comes from. I hope she remembers me. Ethan sat frozen in the dark for a long time after the recording ended. He found Mrs. Choi, the family's longtime housekeeper, in the kitchen at 6 a.m, already awake, already brewing tea like she always did before anyone else in the house was up. Where did Clara learn that song? He asked her. No greeting, no preamble. Mrs. Choi's hands stilled on the teapot. For a woman who had worked in this house for over a decade, who had loved Clara like a daughter, her silence said more than any answer could have. Mrs. Choi. I don't know what you mean, sir, she said, not meeting his eyes. You do. She set the teapot down carefully. Some things Clara asked me to keep for her, sir. Not lies. Just quiet things. She said she'd tell you herself, when the time was right. The time is right now, Ethan said. She's dead, Mrs. Choi. There's no more right time coming. Mrs. Choi's eyes filled. She left the kitchen without a word and returned 5 minutes later with an old photograph, worn soft at the edges like it had been held many times. Ethan took it with shaking hands. Clara, younger, laughing, standing beside an African-American woman at some kind of outdoor music event. Atlanta, the back of the photo read, in Clara's handwriting. And a date. Nearly 6 years before she died. He didn't recognize the woman beside his wife. But something about her face, the shape of it, the eyes, made his stomach drop before his mind caught up to why. He showed the photo to Nia the next morning. Nia went completely still. That's my grandmother, she whispered. That's Evelyn Brooks. Ethan felt the floor shift under him. That's impossible. I know how it looks, Nia said, her voice tight. But I promise you, I have never seen this photograph in my life. Neither of them said the question sitting in the room between them, the one that would define everything that came next. If their grandmothers had crossed paths years before either of them was born, was it really an accident that Nia had ended up here, in this house, at this piano, at exactly the moment Lily needed her most? Or had someone, been quietly moving pieces into place long before either of them arrived? If a mystery like this is starting to pull you in, drop a comment right now with what you think the connection is. I want to see your theory before the truth comes out. And don't forget to like this video. It genuinely helps more people find these stories. Nia called her grandmother that same afternoon, hands trembling as she dialed a number she'd known by heart since she was 6 years old. Grandma, I need to ask you something. Nia held the photograph up to the phone camera, even though she knew her grandmother couldn't see it. There's a photo of you, with a Korean woman, in Atlanta, years ago. Her name was Clara Kang. There was a long silence on the line. Long enough that Nia said her grandmother's name twice before Evelyn finally answered. You shouldn't be asking about that woman, Evelyn said, her voice tight in a way Nia had almost never heard. Grandma, I'm working for her family right now. Her daughter. Her husband. I didn't know until this photo showed up that you two even knew each other. Another silence. Please, Nia said. I need to understand this. Evelyn exhaled slowly. It was at a music conference. International event, all kinds of people. This Korean woman came up to me after I performed, just something small, a song my mother taught me, my mother's mother before that. She was crying. Said she'd never heard anything like it. She asked me to teach it to her. I did. We wrote letters for a while after that. She was a good woman, Nia. Kind. But strange things started happening after we got close. What kind of strange things? She told me once, near the end of our letters, that she discovered something about her husband's family. Something that scared her. She never told me what. And then the letters just stopped. Nia's chest tightened. Grandma. Clara's dead. She died in a car accident 8 months ago. The silence this time lasted so long Nia thought the call had dropped. I always wondered, Evelyn finally said, very quietly, if that accident was really an accident. Nia's hand went cold around the phone. Grandma, what aren't you telling me? But Evelyn had already gone quiet again, the particular quiet of a woman deciding, in real time, how much of an old fear she was willing to hand down to her granddaughter. Some things are better left where they are, baby. Grandma. The line clicked dead. Nia stood in the hallway of Hanul House, phone still pressed to her ear, staring at a photograph of two women who had clearly known something they never got to finish saying out loud, and one of them was already gone. Ethan didn't sleep that night either. He sat in his study with the photograph, the recording, and a growing, cold suspicion he didn't want to look directly at yet. Nia found him there near midnight. She hadn't planned on saying anything about his behavior. She was there about Lily's progress report, but something about the hollow look on his face made her stop in the doorway. "You look like a man who hasn't eaten in 2 days," she said. "I haven't." "That's not sustainable, Mr. Kang."
"Ethan," he said.
"You can call me Ethan. Considering everything." She stepped into the room and sat across from him, uninvited but not unwelcome. "Tell me what you're thinking." He told her about Marcus. No, that was her story. He told her instead about the years before Clara, about how he built a company by trusting almost no one, and how Clara had been the only person who ever made trusting someone feel like a strength instead of a weakness. He told her how guilty he still felt for the last thing he'd said to his wife. "Drive safe," such an ordinary sentence to be the last one. Nia, in turn, told him about Marcus. About the years she couldn't speak either, in her own way, just quieter, less visible, an 18-year-old girl who stopped eating properly and stopped answering her friends and started disappearing into her room with headphones on because the silence of the house was worse than any sound she could put in her ears. "Music didn't fix me," she said. "It just gave the grief somewhere safe to go. That's all I've ever tried to give anyone since." Somewhere in that conversation, something shifted between them. Not sudden, not dramatic, just a quiet recognition of two people who understood loss in the same language. Neither of them said anything about it. Both of them noticed. But they both understood, without saying it out loud, that whatever this was would have to wait. Lily's healing came first. Everything else came second. Vivian Seo had known Ethan for 11 years. She'd been at his side through the company's early struggles, through Clara's illness scare in year 3 of their marriage, through the funeral, standing one respectful step behind him the entire time, waiting for a moment that never quite seemed to come. She found Nia in the garden one afternoon, arranging sheet music that wasn't sheet music at all, just Nia's private notes on Lily's progress. "You're getting too close to this family," Vivian said, no greeting. Nia looked up unbothered. "I'm here because of Lily." "That's what you tell yourself." Vivian's smile didn't reach her eyes. "I've watched women come through this house before. Nurses. Assistants. Every single one of them convinced themselves their intentions were pure right up until they weren't. I'm not interested in Ethan's money, Miss Seo." "I didn't say money." Vivian tilted her head. "But it's interesting that's the first thing you thought to deny." Nia didn't respond to that. She didn't need to. But after Vivian left the garden, she sat there a long moment unsettled, because some small part of her, the part that had noticed the shift with Ethan and hadn't said anything about it either, knew Vivian wasn't entirely wrong to be watching. Vivian didn't stop at the garden conversation. She hired someone quietly, the way people with money and motive tend to, and within a week she had what she needed. An old academic bio of Lily Brooks, a musicologist and performer from Atlanta, and buried in a decade-old newsletter from a small nonprofit, a mention of Lily Brooks and her correspondence with international artists, including a name that made Vivian's breath catch. Clara Kang, listed as a guest attendee at the same 2019 conference. She brought it straight to Ethan. "Did you know," Vivian said, laying the printout on his desk like a winning hand of cards, "that Nia Brooks's grandmother knew your wife? Years before Nia ever set foot in this house." Ethan stared at the paper. His stomach dropped in a way that had nothing to do with logic and everything to do with fear. The fear of being made a fool of twice by two women he'd trusted with his family's most fragile moments. "She didn't tell you that herself," Vivian pressed.
"Did she?"
"No," Ethan said quietly. "She didn't."
"Ethan."
"She didn't come here by accident." He confronted Nia that night in the piano room, the same room where his daughter had come back to life over the past several weeks, and something about the setting made the accusation feel even more like a betrayal. "Your grandmother knew Clara," he said, no preamble, holding up the printout. "Before you ever came here. You knew about this connection."
"Didn't you?"
Nia's face went through several emotions in quick succession: confusion, then hurt, then a kind of controlled anger she was trying very hard not to raise her voice with, given that Lily was asleep 2 floors up. "I found out the same day you did, Ethan. When Mrs. Choi showed us that photograph. I had no idea my grandmother ever knew your wife until that moment." "That's a convenient story. It's the true one." Her voice cracked slightly, which she hated. "I have spent every day for weeks sitting on this floor with your daughter, showing up when 11 other specialists gave up. Do you actually believe I orchestrated some kind of... What exactly? What's the theory here, Ethan? That I planned my career, planned my grandmother's entire life, around the possibility that I'd one day end up in your house." "I don't know what to believe anymore," Ethan said, and that was the most honest thing he'd said all night, and also the cruelest, because it meant he'd chosen suspicion over trust in the exact moment trust mattered most. "Then I think it's best I go," Nia said quietly. He didn't stop her. She was almost at the door when her phone buzzed in her pocket, a message from her grandmother, sent minutes ago, before any of this had even happened. "Nia, call me the second you get this. I remembered something about Clara. Something important. Please call me tonight." Nia stared at the screen, then up at Ethan, who had no idea a second. Bigger truth was about to land on both of them within the hour, a truth that would make the question of who Nia's grandmother was feel small compared to what she actually knew. Lily was awake. She'd been awake the whole time, sitting at the top of the stairs in her small nightgown, listening to raised voices through the banister the way children always seem to know exactly when the adults in their lives are about to break something important. She watched Nia walk toward the front door with her bag. And something in Lily, something that had spent 8 months learning to trust exactly one person outside her father, shattered. She ran down the stairs screaming, a real scream this time, words trying and failing to form, and threw herself at the piano the second she reached the room, hitting the keys with both fists, harder than she ever had before, the sound crashing through the whole house like something breaking apart at the foundation. Ethan ran in. Nia turned back at the door, torn between the instinct to run to the child and the fact that she'd just been fired from the one place she'd been trying to help her. Ethan looked at his daughter, hysterical again for the first time in weeks, and understood with sudden, sickening clarity exactly what he had done. He hadn't just fired a music therapist. He had taken away the one person his daughter trusted enough to come back to life for. Mrs. Choi found the second recording 3 days later, tucked inside the lining of an old coat in the back of Clara's closet, the kind of hiding spot a woman chooses when she's not sure who might come looking. She brought it to Ethan without a word, set it on his desk, and left the room before he could ask any questions she didn't have answers to. He pressed play with hands that weren't entirely steady. Clara's voice again, quieter this time, careful, like she knew she might be recording something dangerous. "If something happens to me, Ethan needs to know that what happened wasn't an accident. I found something in the company records. I don't fully understand it yet, but I know it's bad, and I know some people would rather I stayed quiet about it. If I disappear, if something happens, someone needs to look at the shipping contracts under Song's division. Please." For Lily. The recording cut off abruptly. Ethan sat completely still for a long time, the weight of what he'd just heard pressing down on him like something physical. Song. Director Song. A senior executive who'd been with the company for 9 years. A man Ethan had trusted enough to hand entire divisions of the business to without a second thought. He picked up his phone and made a call he should have made 8 months ago. The investigation moved fast once Ethan started pulling threads instead of avoiding them. Internal auditors, working quietly, discovered exactly what Clara had found. Years of falsified shipping records, funds siphoned through shell companies registered to addresses that didn't exist, all of it routed through Director Song's division. Clara had stumbled onto it during a routine review she wasn't even supposed to be conducting. She'd asked too many of the right questions to the wrong person. The night of the accident, phone records showed a call placed from Song's private line to a number that had since been disconnected, 40 minutes before Clara left for what she told Ethan was a late meeting. It wasn't proof of everything, but it was enough. It was more than enough for Ethan to understand that the story he'd been telling himself for 8 months, a tragic accident, nothing more, nothing to investigate, Nothing to be angry about except grief itself, had been a story someone else had very carefully wanted him to believe. His wife hadn't just died. She had been silenced. And in his grief and his fear, he had taken the one thing that connected him to healing, Nia, and pushed her away over a coincidence that had nothing to do with any of it. He found her at a small apartment she'd rented near the embassy district, her suitcase still half-packed on the bed, flight information open on her laptop for a return trip to Atlanta in 3 days. She opened the door and didn't invite him in. "I was wrong," Ethan said, standing in the hallway like a man arriving somewhere he wasn't sure he had permission to be. "About everything. I let fear make a decision that hurt my daughter and hurt you, and I don't have any excuse good enough to cover that." "No," Nia said. "You don't."
He didn't argue with that.
"I'm not asking you to forgive me right now. I know that's not something you owe me on a timeline that works for my guilt. But I am asking you not to leave. Lily needs you. And he stopped, correcting course, because he knew this couldn't be about him right now. Lily needs you." Nia crossed her arms, studying him for a long, careful moment. "You can't keep pushing people away every time you're afraid of losing them, Ethan. That's not protecting anyone. That's just losing them slower." "I know," he said quietly. "Do you?" "I'm learning too." She looked at him a long moment more. Then she looked past him, down the hallway, in the direction of the estate she'd been driven from, and thought about a 4-year-old girl who was probably back to slamming her fists into a piano because the one person who'd taught her it was safe to feel things had disappeared without warning, exactly the way her mother had. "This isn't about us," Nia finally said. "I'm coming back for her. Not for you." "I understand," Ethan said. And for the first time in a long time, he meant something completely honestly, without any of the armor he usually kept around his own feelings. "That's still more than I deserve right now." We're getting close to the part of the story that changes everything, but before we get there, if you've made it this far, tap subscribe. This channel exists because of people like you who stay till the end, and there's a lot more still coming. Lily hadn't eaten properly in 3 days. She hadn't slept more than an hour at a time. The relapse had frightened everyone in the house, including Dr. Huang, who had watched 8 months of slow progress collapse in 72 hours and quietly told Ethan, in the hallway, out of Lily's earshot, that another setback this severe could take months to undo, if it could be undone at all. When Nia walked back through the front door of Hanul House, Lily was sitting on the piano bench, not playing, just sitting there, staring at nothing. She looked up. For one long, unbearable second, nobody in the room moved. Then Lily got down off the bench and ran, really ran, faster than a 4-year-old should be able to move, and threw herself into Nia's arms so hard Nia had to catch her balance against the doorframe. Nia held her tight, sank down to the floor with her, and began to hum, low and steady, the same lullaby, letting it fill the space the way it had the very first day. Lily's small body shook against her. And then, muffled into Nia's shoulder, barely audible, came a sound that made Ethan's whole world stop. "Mama." The room went completely silent. Mrs. Choi, standing near the doorway, pressed a hand to her mouth. Ethan didn't move, didn't breathe, terrified that any sound from him might make it stop. Nia pulled back slightly to look at Lily's face and understood something Ethan didn't yet. Lily wasn't calling Nia her mother. She was remembering her mother. The word had cracked something open in her, and now, slowly, hesitantly, more words started coming after it. "Mama sang," Lily whispered. "Mama sang before. The night before." "The night before what, sweetheart?" Nia asked gently. "The night before she went away," Lily said, her small voice trembling, working harder than it had worked in 8 months to form each word. "She was scared. She said, 'Be brave for Daddy.' She said someone was coming.
A man.
On the phone. She was crying." Ethan crossed the room in 3 steps and knelt down beside them. "Lily, baby, did you hear anything else? Anything about the man?" Lily's small hand found her father's sleeve and gripped it. "She said a name," she whispered. "I don't remember good. It started with song, like singing." Ethan's blood went cold. It was the final piece. A 4-year-old's fractured, fragile memory. Inadmissible in any courtroom, probably, but enough, combined with the recordings and the falsified records and the phone call 40 minutes before Clara left the house, to confirm everything Ethan had feared and everything Clara had tried to warn him about before she never got the chance to say it out loud. But even as relief and horror crashed over him at once, his phone lit up on the table beside him. A message from his head of security, 3 words that turned his stomach to ice. Song has vanished. The arrest happened quietly, the way these things tend to happen when there's enough money and enough lawyers involved on every side, but it very nearly didn't happen at all. Song had gone to ground the moment he realized the internal audit had reopened, disappearing from his apartment, his phone dark, his car found abandoned near the airport. For 3 tense days, Ethan's security team and the prosecutor's office chased a trail that kept going cold, while Ethan sat awake at night picturing a man desperate enough to silence one woman deciding he had nothing left to lose. He doubled the security around Hanul House without telling Lily why. He made Nia promise not to walk anywhere alone. On the 4th day, Song was found boarding a ferry under a false name, carrying a bag stuffed with cash and a passport that wasn't his. He didn't resist when they took him in. In his hotel room, investigators found a laptop with the deleted files Clara had once tried to warn Ethan about, recovered, this time, in full. It was, in the end, no dramatic scene, no handcuffs at a press conference, just a quiet removal from a ferry dock on a Tuesday morning and a statement released 2 days later. Director Song was charged with financial fraud, obstruction, and, pending further investigation, involvement in Clara's death. The case that had been buried under the word accident for 8 months was finally, fully reopened. It would take months to move through the courts. Ethan knew that. But for the first time since the night of broken glass and rain, he felt something other than grief and guilt sitting in his chest. He felt like his wife had finally been heard. Months passed. Slowly, carefully, the way healing actually happens, not in a single dramatic scene, but in 100 small, ordinary ones nobody would ever put in a movie trailer. Lily started talking more each week. First single words, then short sentences, then, eventually, whole stories about her day at the small preschool Ethan enrolled her in, chattering about a classmate named Yuna and a drawing she'd made of a piano with wings. She started eating full meals again. She started sleeping through the night. She started laughing, really laughing, the loud, unself-conscious laugh of a child who has stopped bracing for the next bad thing. Ethan changed too, in ways slower and less visible but no less real. He left the office earlier. He learned, clumsily at first, how to sit on a floor without an agenda, how to ask his daughter questions and actually wait for the answers instead of already thinking about the next meeting. He learned that providing everything financially had never once been the same thing as being present, and that the difference between those two things was the exact shape of the 8 months his daughter had spent in silence. One afternoon, months after the arrest, months after the last relapse, Ethan came home to find Lily at the piano, not slamming the keys, not even hesitantly touching them, but playing the lullaby. Slowly, imperfectly, a 4-year-old's version of it, but unmistakably the same melody Clara had taught her, the same one Nia's grandmother had taught Nia's own mother generations before either family had any idea their lives would ever cross an ocean and collide in a piano room in Seoul. Ethan stood in the doorway and watched, tears in his eyes. He didn't try to hide this time. Nia came up beside him quietly and watched too. "She's healing," Nia said softly. "Because of you," Ethan said. "Because of both of you," Nia corrected. "I just opened a door. You're the one who walked through it every single day after that." He told her, one evening not long after, sitting on the porch overlooking the city lights while Lily slept upstairs, that he'd spent 8 months believing love meant protecting someone from everything, pain, fear, uncertainty, even grief itself. That the money, the specialists, the lockdown security of his entire life had all been an attempt to build a wall high enough that nothing could ever hurt his family again. "You taught me something different," he said. "You taught me that sometimes love means letting someone stand beside you when you're afraid. Not fixing it for them. Just staying." He reached into his pocket and produced a small ring. Not Clara's, Not anything that tried to replace what had come before. Something entirely new, chosen carefully. "I don't want you to replace anyone," Ethan said. "I want to build something new. With you. If you'll let me." Nia looked at the ring for a long moment, then at him, and thought about a lullaby that had traveled across an ocean and 2 generations to end up exactly here, in exactly this moment, holding 2 grieving families together instead of apart. "Yes," she said quietly. "Yes, I will. If you're not crying right now, I might be a little bit." Comment below and tell me the moment that got you the most. I read every single one, and it genuinely means a lot to see this story landing the way I hoped it would. Evelyn flew out 2 weeks later, older and slower than the photograph in Clara's thing suggested, but sharp-eyed as ever, and sat with Nia and Ethan on the porch the first night, finally finishing the sentence she'd left hanging months earlier. "I remembered something after we talked," Evelyn said. "Clara sent me one more letter, right before the letter stopped. I never told you because I couldn't find it. Took me weeks to dig it out of an old box. She wrote that she was frightened, but she also wrote that she trusted her husband would do the right thing if anything ever happened to her. She said, and I remember this exactly, 'Ethan is a good man who forgets to look up from his work. If I'm gone, someone will have to remind him to look up.'" Evelyn looked at Nia. "I think that's exactly what you did, baby. Whether either of you understood it that way at the time or not." Ethan sat with that for a long moment, throat tight. It didn't erase 8 months of grief, or the fear that had made him doubt Nia, or the year of silence Lily had lived through. But it settled something in him that had been unsettled since the night of the accident. The sense that Clara had never simply been a memory to move past, but a woman who had, in her own quiet way, tried to make sure her family would be looked after even from beyond the reach of a phone call she never got to finish. The wedding was small, intimate, held in the garden at Hanol House, the same garden where Vivian had once tried to convince Nia she didn't belong there. Vivian didn't attend. Some bridges, once burned by suspicion and betrayal, take longer to rebuild than others, if they ever get rebuilt at all, and both Ethan and Nia had made their peace with that. Lily was the flower girl, 5 years old now, scattering petals down the aisle with the kind of unrestrained joy that made every guest smile through tears. A photograph of Clara sat quietly on a small table near the front, not hidden away, not treated like a wound to avoid, but included. A woman who was still, in every way that mattered, Lily's mother, honored rather than erased. Evelyn Brooks flew in from Atlanta for the ceremony, 81 years old and sharper than most people half her age, and stood at the piano before the vows began, her hands steady despite her years, and played the lullaby one more time, the song that had started this whole story, the song that had traveled from her mother's kitchen to a music conference in Atlanta to a grieving widow in Seoul to a traumatized little girl who'd forgotten how to speak, and finally, to a wedding. Nobody in that garden needed the song explained to them anymore. They'd all lived the explanation. Years later, nobody kept exact count. The way families rarely do once the hard years are behind them, Lily sat at that same piano, older now, her hands steady and confident on the keys, playing the lullaby the way it deserved to be played, with all the years of practice and all the years of healing woven into every note. Nia sat beside her, humming the harmony she'd been humming since a small girl first stopped hitting the keys long enough to listen. Ethan stood in the doorway, watching, the same doorway where he'd once stood powerless and afraid, watching now instead with the quiet, settled joy of a man who had learned, slowly and imperfectly, how to actually show up. A younger child ran into the room, small, laughing, chasing something only she could see, and Lily stopped playing mid-note and laughed too, jumping up to chase after her little sister, the music trailing off into the ordinary, beautiful chaos of a family that had made it through. Nia looked over at Ethan. He smiled. The lullaby kept playing softly somewhere, the way certain songs never really stop once they've found the people they belong to. Some songs are born from sorrow. Some carry memories across oceans, through generations, through grief nobody chose and connections nobody could have predicted. And sometimes, the very song that once reminded a family of everything they lost becomes the song that finally teaches them how to love again. That's the story. If it moved you even a little, Do 3 things before you go. Hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Drop a like so this reaches someone who needs it today, and leave a comment telling me which character's healing hit you the hardest. I read them all, and honestly, they're a big part of why I keep making these. Thank you for staying till the very end. I'll see you in the next one.